Okay, welcome everybody to yet another NOVA Scribes. And again, I'm happy to report that NOVA Scribes has entered into a strategic partnership with the IFVP, the International Forum of Visual Practitioners. We are now running their learning function. So they have had for a long time their online learning series, or OLS. We looked at what they were doing. They looked at what we were doing. We said, well, it's basically the same thing. How about we just do it for them? And so now this workshop is part of IFVP learning. You don't have to be an IFVP member, but I am going to talk a little bit about what that is and what it means. NOVA Scribes is always going to be a free and open forum for visual practitioners to share their ideas. This series of workshops is called Retooling You. I think this is about the fifth one that we've run. And I think we've got about another 15 that are scheduled. Retooling You is all about how do you bring your practice as a facilitator forward. This is kind of a weird time in Northern Virginia, where we're based. Most of us are. It's kind of a weird time. And usually in times like this, well, I think it's a good idea to take a look at yourself and say, do I need to retool? Is there a skill set that I might want to have? And if you've been waiting for that moment to say, hey, maybe this is a time for me to launch my facilitation practice, that's what Retooling You is all about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off and let's do this thing. So this particular one is about doing a skills inventory. It's to check in with yourself just to see where you're at. And if you don't mind, go ahead and scan this here QR code with your phone. Alternatively, you can drop this link into chat. Let me go ahead and do that. Drop this link into chat. Just go ahead and click on that, and you will join us in Mentimeter, which we're going to be using in order to gather your ideas. If you see this screen that says you're all set, well, you're all set, which is great. By the way, if I mute you, it's not personal. It's just that I'm picking up a little bit of background noise. You can always unmute yourself. Okay. All right. I will leave that QR code up for just about another second or two. 1, 2. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Just a reminder, hang out. Let me get myself out of the way. Hang out for just a few minutes after the workshop so that you can actually get a copy of these slides. Okay, after we're done. I'll download this and you'll be able to take it with you as a resource. And again, if you're just joining, you're in the right place. Scan that QR code and you will be in business. So again, hang out for a few minutes. I'll be able to download the PDF and send it to you. That way you'll have this as a resource. Okay, first things first. Again, this is all about skills and skilling yourself up as a facilitator or as a visual facilitator. Let's bring some of your ideas to the table. What skills do you believe are most important to be a visual practitioner? That is to say, anybody who sits at the intersection of group process and visuals. Give me some answers in here. And by the way, you can do multiple responses. So let's do a quick brainstorming. Listening, that's a very important skill. Listening to hear, okay. Let's see what else is coming in. Group facilitation, facilitating groups, yep. Break that down for me, right? Like what goes into facilitation? Sensing, being on the balcony, good one. When we talk about being on the balcony, this, of course, I think it comes from Ron Heifetz, but the idea there of like separating yourself from the dance floor of the conversation, gaining an objective lens to say what's happening from a group dynamics perspective. Yep, so observation, sensing, synthesizing, asking good questions. Words first. Yeah, if you're doing some graphic recording, I think that it begins with words. Later, we're going to do something on the protocol of graphic recording. And I think it begins with words. A core set of images. Curiosity. Love that one. By the way, if there's anything on here that you like, feel free to like retype it and it'll get a little bit bigger in our word cloud. Distilling key points. I think that's pretty close to synthesis. Listening comes up again. Okay. Organizing, like the ability to like organize thoughts. Yeah, how do you take a whole bunch of ideas? How do you take a whole bunch of ideas from 20 or so different people and organize them? Casey and Chris, just a reminder, keep an eye on the waiting room for me. Okay. All right, cool. I think that that's a pretty good critical mass of ideas. Yep, designing sessions, having peers to learn from. Well, you've got that. Welcome to NOVA Scribes, a free and open forum for visual practitioners. All right, I'm going to bring in some more of your ideas in just a second. Let me tell you how the rest of our time together is organized. Okay, here we go. So I thought that this would be a good way to kind of frame our conversation. What you're looking at here is something that was literally decades in the making. I'm not exaggerating at all. If I had to guess, I'd say that this probably took 30 years to put together. What this is the International Forum of Visual Practitioners Institute Visual Practitioner Competency Model. Now, that was a mouthful. For years and years, people have tried to decode what does it take for you to actually be a visual practitioner or a graphic facilitator or a graphic recorder, okay? A few years ago, what the IFVP, the International Forum of Visual Practitioner, decided to do is that they wanted to get their hands around this. And they did a meta study. They looked at work from M.G. Taylor, the Grove Consultants, Brandy Agerback, Diane Bleck, I'm missing lots of people, Sam Brad, Kelvy Bird, anybody who's written just about anything on the practice. And they said, all right, what are those common competencies that are there? And they came up with this massive list of all of the skills that all of these different luminaries in our field said, this is what it takes in order to be able to do this. And then going back to your list a second ago, they triaged, they organized, they said, well, here's the things that are common. And finally, just last year, they came out with this model, okay? So there is underneath each one of these fields that are here, a list of competencies, okay? The way that it's organized is by what do you feel, what do you know, and then what do you do? Okay, those are the big three categories that are here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each one of those big three. We're going to assess your skills, which is to say you're going to see where you stand with each one of these things. And then we'll focus on each one of those areas depending on where it stands as a group. So this is a chance for you to reflect on each one of these skills, or I should say the competencies in each one of these groups. And then we'll share some resources around each one of them where you can go to develop. And that will be the flow that we'll have for the rest of our time together. Sound good? All right, let's do the first one then. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate yourself? Now, this is the feel field, for lack of a better word, the feel group. And let me qualify these. You can answer if you feel like you've got a pretty good lens on this already. But if you want to, give me just a second and I'll give you a little bit of context so that you know what you're getting into, okay? So when we talk about, first of all, self-awareness, this is about understanding your strengths, your challenges, your presence, how you influence people, and your own lived experience, okay? So that's your degree of self-awareness. That's what it means in this context. Around remaining present, this is having the ability to maintain focus on the current moment and also to refocus attention to remain present, to be there in the moment with people. On self-management, here we're talking about the degree to which your reactions, you're aware of your biases, you can manage your energy, and you're focused on your own needs. You know what it takes in order to recharge your batteries. Okay, so that's self-management. Cultural competence. This has to do with respect, appreciation, and interaction with other cultures, their belief systems, especially if those belief systems and cultures are different from your own. And finally, unbiased listening. So this is about capturing people's expressions without necessarily altering their content or ideas. Okay, perfect. So we've got the first person who has weighed in. And by the way, you can kind of judge yourself and see where it stands. You know, is this something for you to work on, or is this a towering strength? And let me just say, if I notice that there's kind of a weight towards the left side, that's the one that we're going to focus on. Okay. In the background, what I've done is I've actually made several lists of some develop in place opportunities around each one of these competencies. Okay. All right. So we've got about 6 people who have weighed in, kind of judging themselves. Looks like self-awareness is kind of high. Good. Okay. All right. Remaining present looks like that one, you know, not too far behind, but there's a little bit of a distribution here. That's what I like about these curves. It shows you what the distro is. Okay. Tiff says, I've answered assuming that I'm not hungry, late, tired, or anxious. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think if you've got any of that stuff going on, you know, my self-management kind of goes out the window, quickly followed by my ability to remain present. Okay. Feel free to finish this one up. Again, this is also a check in yourself. Just a check on yourself to say what are the things that I might want to focus on later. Excuse me. But let's pull in some resources around this one and let's focus on, just because it happens to be slightly the lower one here, remaining present. Okay, so we're going to focus on remaining present. So I'm going to change the prompt a little bit here. On the topic of remaining present, what are some things that you can do to remain present? I'm also going to drop in some of the ideas that I've got around this one. Things that you can do to remain present. And by the way, one idea per sticky. Hit return. Yeah, so pause. Hit return after every one of your ideas. Okay. Let's spend just a minute on this one. What could you do to remain present? And by the way, I'm also going to sprinkle in some of the ideas that I've already gathered. Let me get out of the way. Okay, so here's some of the things that I'm seeing come in. Pause, prepare, identify what actually causes you to wander if you're losing focus. Taking a deep breath, having a clear objective, stepping away. Yeah, kind of like along the lines of that pause. Increasing your impulse control, taking deep breaths. There it is again. Breathe. So a lot around oxygen. Oxygen is helpful. Making notes, putting your phone down, keeping soft eye contact. Try to get my kids to do this at dinner. It doesn't always work. Having a plan, delaying gratification, breathing. There it is a third time. Lost, practice curiosity. Okay, so this is a good one. Sometimes if we find our attention wavering, right? If we're losing focus, if we're losing presence, it might be because we're lost. Sometimes we're doing very technical work. We're doing work that's way over our heads. Just last week, I was working with a bunch of doctors talking about stuff I had no idea what they were talking about half the time. And so if you find yourself losing track, it's a good idea to say, all right, well, how might I practice some curiosity here? What is something that I can pull out of this conversation, especially if it gets into the weeds of technicalities? Reminding myself why I'm here, focusing on purpose, being aware of body space. By the way, if that one was yours, I'm going to invite you to go off mute and speak to that one a little bit. What does it mean to be aware of body space? Mary Jo, go for it.
It was me. So just kind of being present in your body, like where your feet are, where your arms are, where your seat is. It's that kind of recentering piece.
Love it. Thank you. There it is again. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Mirroring. Mary Jo, I think this speaks to your point about just like centering and coming back to center and purpose. Space for silence, capturing essential points, remembering it's not about me, acknowledging, validating, putting a pin in it, asking myself, how do I want to meet this moment? Mirroring. Okay, that is a core facilitation skill, and oftentimes we say that without knowing what it means. If mirroring was yours, same thing. I'm going to invite you to come off mute and give us the 10 seconds. What is mirroring? Casey, yeah. What do you got?
When I think of mirroring in a conversation, there's two ways to do this. Literally mirroring the body language. If someone's leaning forward, lean forward. If someone's leaning out, lean out. If they're crossing their arms, crossing their arms. There's also a way to engage with people in a conversation where every once in a while just repeat the last three words they said.
Mm-hmm.
Last three words.
Last three words.
And that's last three words. I had an amazing time last night.
Amazing. Yeah, right. Good one.
So it's a nice subtle way to keep the conversation going.
Until somebody figures it out. They're like, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing? Yeah, that's a good one. That's great, Casey. I'll have to remember that one. So another thing is if you've read The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making by Sam Kaner, his way of using the word mirroring is slightly different, but related to what Casey said. So when he says mirroring, when Kaner says mirroring, he does mean to literally say exactly what the participant said as a way of confirming, validating, and acknowledging. Now he contrasts mirroring, what did you eat last night? With paraphrasing, right? Or synthesizing. That's the idea where we actually take what somebody says. And so what I hear you say is, and we put it in our own words. Okay. All right. These are some great answers. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one then. By the way, this was the feel domain, the feel group. So let's go ahead and go into the next one, which is about what we know. This is about expertise. So again, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate yourself? Now here, when we talk about business expertise, we're talking about, well, really having business knowledge in order to be able to support the process and delivery of services. So I've worked with, nobody here, I've worked with some fabulous graphic recorders that needed a little bit of work when it came to the way that they actually ran their business. So this is about, that's the business expertise. It's really the entrepreneurship side of things. Professionalism. This is having a professional attitude. I need to work on this one. This is one that I'm not great at. I try to intentionally bring in some levity, and I often get the feedback of, Brian, this would have been a lot more effective if you'd been more professional. It's like, okay, fine. I'm probably not your person. Adaptive anticipation. This is the ability to anticipate and adapt to what the client needs. Okay. Chris and I do a lot of discovery calls together. Like most of the time, we're about 3 or 4 steps ahead of where our clients are. Our problem is like holding back on that and letting them articulate where they're trying to get to. So adaptive anticipation is like, okay, getting ahead of where they are and then supporting them once they get there. And then finally, professional growth. This gets back to that idea that we saw about curiosity, which is building and maintaining a professional knowledge for continued growth. What are you doing to sharpen your skills, add to your toolbox? What certifications are you getting? Chris is always making fun of me for all the certifications I'm getting. But Casey and I went to the voltage control summit, and I had a marvelous time doing that, right? So it's like, what are you doing to, again, add to your toolbox and sharpen yourself as an instrument, right? You're investing in yourself. Okay, we got 10 people who have waited on this one. Looks like there's actually, this is cool. This is where the distributions get in to be kind of handy. So if you take a look at this, so you've got business expertise and then adaptive anticipation are close on the numeric value. However, if we take a look at the distribution, the hump is a little bit towards the left on business expertise, right? It's a little bit leftwardly facing. So let's focus on that one. So here again, with business expertise, this is about like the knowledge to actually support the process and delivery of services. So let's go to the next slide. Here we go. What resources might you recommend if you wanted to boost your own business expertise? Okay, take just a second. Let's throw some ideas in here. Okay, and again, I've got some that I've saved before. What might you do in order to boost your business expertise? Okay, business certification, find a mentor. I love it. Attend Retooling You. Perfect answer. Whoever that was, you get an A. Okay. Talking to friends, finding a mentor. Okay, networking, getting an MBA. Just kidding. I mean, it's not a bad solution, to be very honest with you. I have an MBA. I've used it a little bit. Actually, that's not true. I use it a lot. And it does give you, I think, my way of thinking of it is that, it kind of catches you up about 10 years in whatever industry you want to be in. Small business groups. Yeah. So for example, EO would be one that I'd recommend, the Entrepreneurs Organization. Seeing a couple of nods on that one. That's one of several that are out there. I did about a year of EO. I got a lot out of it. Shadowing others, understanding your runway. Tell me about runway. What do we mean by that? Feel free to go off mute. Casey.
I feel like I'm dominating. But like with a lot, well, your runway, I think of a runway as, well, how long can you be working your business till you got to think about doing something else or changing the direction you're going? And how much resource do you have? How much resources do you have, funding wise, client wise, et cetera, before you got to think about trying a different path?
Okay, so this is like, how long can this keep me afloat until I have to, go on food stamps or, otherwise put myself out there? Is that kind of where you're going? Yeah, okay. I've never done that math. I think that would scare me if I've done that. Let's see what else is here. 1,000,000 cups, maybe? Tell me about 1,000,000 cups.
Isn't it like a entrepreneurship? You can come like pitch your ideas. It's a group and people will give you feedback on your ideas. You learn biz stuff.
Tiff, I've never heard of that one before. I'd love to, maybe you can find a resource for it. That'd be
Will
cool.
do.
Thank you. All right. A Million Cups. Casey, you know that one? No, he's just commenting in chat. Casey, I love your chat comments. My husband support, colleague group to learn and grow. So let me give you a resource on this one, actually. So NOVA Scribes has had an intermittent virtual board of advisors event. And so the way that it works is that, you come in, you're paired with about 3 other people. You ask questions, you say, here are the challenges that I'm facing. And then there's a very structured approach based on one of the liberating structures. Casey probably remembers what it is. I don't. But based on one of the liberating structures to provide really targeted feedback on that, answering from your own experience. So keep an eye out for the virtual board of advisors. That would be a good one. Okay. Especially as entrepreneurs, especially as independents. Allison, you got something coming up for you?
No, I was going to talk about Million Cups.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Well, it's very cool. It's not you don't go in and pitch your business. What you do is you pitch your business plan.
Ah.
And then they've got mentors in the room who ask you really tough questions. I've never done it because I'm too scared, but it's really helpful.
Interesting. Tell me about being too scared, if you're okay with that.
Oh, well, my husband's retiring and he's going to help me with my business as he has been, because that's the part I don't enjoy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Couple of other things got dropped in. Allison, thank you for sharing that. A couple of other things got dropped in. So business mastermind groups. You can Google this. A mastermind format is a great thing to have. This is another word for peer coaching, right? You find a couple of people who are sort of in the same boat as you, and you say, hey, let's do a mastermind group. You get together, maybe there's 3, 4 of you. Of course, the more that there is, the tougher it is to schedule, but maybe you get together once a month and you just say, here's what's going on, right? We talked about NOVA Scribes Virtual Board of Advisors. Casey, I have a feeling you dropped that one in. So thank you for doing that. Nope, Chris did it. Chris did it. Nope. Yeah, she did. Okay, got it. Business model canvas. I'm glad to see that one in here. So the business model canvas, this is Googleable, but you can find this one. This was designed by, I think it was Alex Osterwalder, if I'm not getting that wrong. You could think of it as a business plan on a single sheet of paper. So it's a visual template where you identify your key activities, your key resources, really your value proposition, and then all of the things that support it. So again, it's a business plan on a single sheet of paper. I think it's a fabulous resource, the business model canvas. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Here we go. By the way, if I set this up properly, I think I did this so that you can do Q&As along the way. They should be gathering at the end, but we'll leave time for that afterward. Okay, let me frame this next one a little bit. So the do part is actually split into 3 different sort of 2 different sections. The first one is about basic skills, okay? So as we're thinking about just like the basic technical skills of being a visual practitioner, legibility. Can people read your writing? That's really what we're talking about there, right? How legible is it? Drawing skills. So can people identify what it is you're trying to draw? My nightmare, the thing that keeps me up at night, when I wake up at 3 a.m., cold sweat, is where I've got participants staring at my chart being, what's that supposed to be? That's like my automatic nightmare. I've had that nightmare, like, I've lost track of it. What's that supposed to be? It's like, really don't want to hear that. So that's drawing skills. That's number 2. Number 3, preparation. So here we're talking about like understanding the range of tools and materials that you have. Do you know when you should be drawing on foam core versus paper? Do you know if you should be going digital versus ink and pen, right? So like, what's your facility being able to go, back and forth with these things? We had Chris and I are going to be doing one where we're actually going to be drawing white on black, which is its own thing altogether, which is kind of cool if you take a look at it. Very technical, kind of techie sort of vibe. And so that's why we made that call. Preparation is really about how well do you know the breadth of tools that are out there, and then how well do you use them, okay? And then finally, group-oriented capture. So here what we're talking about is understanding how to manage time and space. So let's say that you've got a standard 8-foot chart, right? You've got an hour-long conversation. How much of that chart is filled up 30 minutes into it? How much is filled up 45 minutes into it? Are you good at managing the space and time according to the group needs? Are you doing a 1-day chart or a 1 hour chart based on what's going on. And again, all of this depends. All right, so kind of assess yourself. Where do you stand? We've got about 5 people who have weighed in. Let me make myself a little smaller so you can see it. I had a request to get out of the way of the chart, so let me switch this up a little bit. There we go. I'll just share the charts. Okay. So this last one's about group-oriented capture. Well, I should say the lowest one that's there. So here, again, we're really talking about managing time and space. And I gave you a couple of different scenarios around that. So on the one hand, are we talking about like how much content am I capturing? Is this a 1-day chart? Is this a 1-hour chart, for example? Also, like thinking about time and space as being 2 dependent variables on each other. If I've got eight feet of chart, right? How much into it am I based on where I am in the room? Okay. So let's, in the agenda, I should say. So let's go ahead and skip ahead. What resources would you offer, or what techniques might you offer specifically around that time and space function of group-oriented capture? What resources, ideas, what would you offer around like managing time and space? Chunking. That's a fun word. Chunking, chunking, chunking. Who can tell me what chunking is? You can go off mute. Tell me about chunking.
And just splitting the time in the meeting for certain activities so they don't overflow into other activities. And then also, I guess, dividing your space, maybe if you have a single whiteboard that you're sharing. That's not so much of a problem these days with the online tools, though. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lolita. Yeah. So practicing live, talking to experienced practitioners to get their strategies. If you're halfway through the meeting, you should be halfway through the chart. Note during things like TED Talks. Yeah, okay, let's talk about that. That's a really, really good thing to do. I do this almost no matter what, especially if it's a blitz of information coming at me fast. I often will have, if not some sticky notes around, like a notepad. And this is actually something that I learned from Kelvy Bird, but I've actually seen her where she'll take notes and then she'll, in her head, organize layout, right? Based on the texture of the conversation, and then take that layout that she's envisioning and then put it up on the chart. So it might seem like a longer process, but in reality, if you take notes, like on a notepad or something, first of all, you don't have to rely on your own memory. Second of all, you can triage the information. You can say, well, I thought this was going to be important, but maybe it's not that important. And then third, you can also group the information, which is one of the things you identified as important as early on. Okay? Having a template to follow. Yeah, using, like, for example, well, we just talked about the business model canvas or a graphic game plan or a graphic roadmap, but some other template where it's like, okay, this helps me organize my content in some way. Thinking ahead about how much real estate you should have consumed by a third of the way through, etc., half the way through, getting the agenda ahead of time. Yep. Love all that. Let me see if I can, let me diverge for a little bit. I think we're doing okay on time. Okay. I want to show you something real quick. This is something that I show off during a discovery meeting. Hopefully that worked. Yeah, here we go. Okay, a couple of different scenarios. This was one of my favorite facilitations ever. Okay. And what we're looking at is really a strategic plan done in the room with a board of directors, right? This is sort of like an advisory board. And the way that it's organized is that each one of the charts in this case is a different modality. In other words, it's a different section of the strategic plan. So by the time we were done with this, yeah, Tiff, it's an amazing space too. By the time we were done with this, we had all the content that we needed to then go and then write a strategic plan based on what was on the charts. Now, based on what we had to do, we were allotting about 1 hour per each one of these charts. So this is let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, we got 7 charts. It was an 8-hour meeting. Where was the other hour? We were eating lunch. Okay. And so that's one way to think about it is, again, like, based on what you're doing throughout the course of the day, what does the time and tempo of these things need to be? Now, just to contrast a little bit, so this is 7 charts coming out of 8 hours. This is 1 chart coming out of 1 day. This happens to be what's called a wisdom wall, where you ask some good open-ended questions of the people who are just kind of meandering by in your space. This was at an expo. Okay. And so in this case, it was a lot more drawing focused. It was a lot more illustrative. I took my time and did a word graphic for each one of the answers that I had. Okay. But that was the time and pacing. I wasn't going to have time to change paper between, hours, because this was just one long 1-day event. Okay. So again, just an idea to show you the way that I think about like time and space. Cool. Any comments, questions about this one before we move on? All right. So again, this was the do part of the model. And again, do is broken into 2 separate sections. One of them is on basic skills. So you could read that as like the technique, really understanding how to use the tools. The other part of do is what we might call facilitative skills. And I just want to give you a heads up. There are 10 competencies underneath this one. And so let's go through the first 5 together, okay? And then we'll make a call on which one we want to focus on. So where we talk about adaptive performance, this again is the ability to anticipate and adapt when you're recording and facilitating. This is the ability to be dynamic. So the group might be veering off in one conversation. You have to make the call if you're facilitating to say, all right, do I follow this? Or do I bring them back on track, back onto the agenda that we agreed to? So this is how dynamic are you? I would say the opposite of this is being like rigidly, this is the plan and we are sticking to it. Second, categorization. So this is, you've been talking about this before, but this is like the organizing of content, right? Oh, okay, like these 3 things are related to each other, so we're going to group them together. I think that's equally important if you're facilitating or recording. Active listening. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's involving the discernment of different listening levels. What level of listening am I at? Is it that basic hearing level? Or am I listening a little bit deeper to say, okay, well, what might this person mean? What's going on there? What's behind the words? Or am I at a generative level where I'm listening to the intent? Am I listening at a coaching level, right? Where I'm really trying to understand this person's emotional state when they're getting into it. So that's active listening. Page layout, again, this is understanding how to lay out the chart from left to right, top to bottom, inside out, however you do it. Am I following like kind of a popcorn? We're just going to put stuff wherever it goes. Or is it more of a template? That one's page layout. And then finally, information design. So I think of this as flow, right? This is the ability to like navigate a chart. A lot of the graphic recordings that I see out there, I might start strong in the upper left-hand corner with a title, but then I get a little bit lost. It's like, where do I go from there? So this is having like a really strong directionality to the chart, something that like guides me through, like, how do I read this from left to right, or however you design it. Okay, so again, we've got adaptive performance, categorization, active listening, page layout, and then information design. 4 people who have weighed in. Seven people. Plus a little thumbs up. Okay. Just another second. All right, looks like we're going to look at page layout. And again, just for context, this is understanding the different formats that we might use. I showed you just very briefly in that example in the National Building Museum, different layouts. There was a different layout on each one of those, but let's pull in some resources here. Let's say that you wanted to develop your competence around page layout. Wait a minute. Oh, wait, hang on. Time out. Did this on purpose. This is the other half. I couldn't fit them all in one slide. This is the other half. So let me go over this last half of the facilitative skills, okay? Hierarchy of information. So to what extent are the things that are most important, least important, so forth? So you could think of this as like title, subtitle, text. The Grove calls this glance, scan, read, study. Okay, some people are already into it. That's fine. That's hierarchy. Pattern recognition. So this is the ability to discern relationships and patterns in context. So think about like mind maps, think about structured radial network diagrams, think about like, how do I connect this thing to something else, right? That's pattern recognition. Visual communication. So this is how to use graphic elements such as like color or connectors or containers in order to divide, contain, group, separate, okay? That's visual communication. Documentation skills. Again, this is how to use things like templates, things like formats, things like metaphor, right? This is like a bridge. Okay, well, if it's a bridge, what's on the two sides? What's underneath it? What's supporting it, right? What's weighing it down? What's the crack in the bridge? What's at the bottom of the gorge, right? What's the risk here? And then finally, group dynamics. So this is an understanding of group processes in order to find collective meaning and move people through to a goal. I think that that's the biggest one. That's a lot that we put in there. You could put all of facilitation into that last one, but that's a big one. All right, let's see where you stand. So we've got hierarchy, pattern recognition, visual communication, documentation skills, and group process. I've got 3 people who have kind of, assessed themselves. I'm sorry, 5. There's 7. Oh, looks like it's a little neck and neck here. All right, let's compare and see where we stood. So it looks like the low score on this one is visual communication. So again, there we're talking about graphic elements like color, containers, connectors, and then 2.5 on this one. Okay, so we've got a winner. So we are going to focus on page layout. Page layout. So this is understanding like the different flows and formats. All right, now let me go ahead and advance to this one. Let's say that you wanted to develop that in yourself. So understanding different page layouts, everything from like free form popcorn to very structured format. What might be some resources for you while you're entering some? Let me go find some. NOVA Scribes. Okay, that's always the right answer. If you want to ace the test, the correct answer is always NOVA Scribes, okay? Studying other people's works, slideology. Yeah, that's a great one. Mentoring, templates. Okay. We'll get to that in just a second. Let me find a couple more. There we go. We'll get to that. Give me just a second. And let's do one more. Figma, Draw.io, templates for various kinds of meetings, liberating structures, websites, Session Lab library is a good one. Yep. Yes. And here's the other one I wanted to find. Okay. Let me give you 3 resources for this particular one. All right. You may have seen this one before. Brandy Agerbeck back in 2020 did a NOVA Scribes on visual organization. I would highly recommend you go back and take a look at that one. Okay. She ranked from left to right in terms of like complexity, and maybe complexity is not the right word, but it's like, how hard, how much thought do you have to put into these things? Where on the far left, you have a linear list. We're going to go top to bottom. Boop, 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 boop. We're just going to record things as they go. And then on the far left, did I do that right? No, on the far right, you've got synthesis, which is like at this whole meta level. And she describes each one of these things. If you take a look at that, she's got popcorn at a level 2, where you're just kind of like popping stuff in. Okay. Structured clusters right at around like level 4, where it's like, now we're going to do a little bit of grouping and we're going to add some containers to things. Scaled structure with elements of synthesis, an integrated whole. So when she talks about an integrated whole, she's saying like kind of like what Kelvy does all the time. It's like, here's one composition that captures the whole thing, right? We can see how these different pieces and parts move with each other. You can read it at a whole chart level, and you can read it at an individual kind of idea level. Okay, so that's one resource for you. Okay, another one. Wait, where'd it go? Hold on, I had to. Okay, this is the Groves Group Graphics Keyboard, kind of the same thing. This one goes from simple on the left to complex on the right. You could kind of say that Brandy's sort of does the same thing. It's a different spin, doing kind of the same thing that Brandy's does. Let me go through this one. So on the far left, we've got posters. So these are single ideas. You grab a flip chart, you do like kind of one idea. Welcome, that's one idea. Grab a seat, that's another idea. Maybe it's a principal poster, but yeah, like one idea per sheet on this one. Then a list, we've already talked about that with Brandy's. Then clusters, right? That might be like, scattergram type thing, where we're like grouping ideas together, organizing things into a grid, a high-low. What is that McKinsey thing? You can represent anything in a 2x2. Chris, thanks for finding Brandy's link there. Diagrams. This is where we get into like really fun stuff. Things like, Ishikawa diagrams. What did Brian just say? It's the same thing as a fishbone. So an Ishikawa diagram, a fishbone diagram, mind maps fall into this one. Okay. You can geek out on mind maps later. Drawings. This is really where we're talking about templates, and you can kind of squint at this thing and see the graphic game plan. And then finally moving out to mandalas, which are really sacred shapes, things that start from the inside and then radiate outward. So that's the Groves Group Graphics Keyboard. That's another one. You can find that one online. And then finally, this one's a little mind-blowing, but I'd recommend it. The other guy who's done a lot of work thinking about this idea of layout, so to speak, is Dave Gray. And so he's got this resource out there that's called 100 Visual Frameworks. If you geek out on templates as much as I do, I would highly recommend this one. He starts at a 2x2 matrix, calendar, cycle, dashboard, force fields, fractals, mazes, pane maps, pyramids, root causes, and boom, there's an Ishikawa diagram, also known as a fishbone, right? So he's got a really, really great like meta view of all of these different layouts that are out there. Okay, Kissimmee, thank you for dropping in that that resource as well. Okay, let's see where we stand. Any questions? At this point, we have gone through all of the IFVP competencies. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions in just a minute. But let me go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'll see you at the next one. But hang out for a second so that I can get the download of this to you. All right, here we go.